I had spent most of my life hearing that Nova Ark was the safest place in the galaxy. My father disagreed. He was Admiral Voss, commander of a fleet older than some civilizations, and he distrusted anything described as safe. Still, I loved the station. Nova Ark was enormous, a city built among the stars where dozens of species lived, traded, studied, and argued beneath the same artificial sky. Ancient civilizations sent ambassadors there. Young species came to learn about the galaxy. Merchants filled the lower decks, while diplomats occupied the shining towers above. Humanity was one of those young species. Most people considered humans strange, but harmless. They had only recently entered galactic society. They possessed no ancient empire, no remarkable biology, and no great military reputation. Humans simply worked. I saw them repairing machinery, carrying cargo, maintaining life support systems, and cleaning equipment. They were useful, certainly, but nobody feared them. I certainly didn't. At 19, I believed I understood the galaxy. I was about to discover how little I understood humanity. The alarm began at 1417 station time. I remember the exact minute because, years later, I found the time preserved in the official Nova Ark incident archive. At first, nobody panicked. The station lights shifted from white to amber, and a calm voice announced an external security alert. People stopped walking. Conversations faded. Everyone waited for the usual explanation. It never came. Instead, the voice returned. Unidentified military vessels have entered the outer system. All civilian personnel are advised to remain inside designated secure areas. A second later, the station shook. This time, everyone understood. The Kharon had arrived. I had heard stories about them since childhood. They were predators in the oldest sense of the word. A species whose civilization had been built through conquest. Even ancient empires avoided direct confrontation with them. Someone screamed. Then the hall erupted. Students ran toward shelters. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Diplomats began shouting into communicators, demanding evacuation ships. Security officers struggled to control the crowds. I stood frozen beside Tessa. "How many ships?" she asked. A tactical display appeared above us. The answer made my stomach tighten. Dozens of red markers surrounded Nova Ark. Then more appeared. 100, 120, 140. The number kept increasing. The station's defensive network activated. Massive shield generators came online throughout the outer rings, and automated weapon platforms rotated toward the approaching fleet. Everyone expected the defenses to hold. Then another impact struck. The floor jumped beneath my feet. I grabbed the nearest railing. Tessa nearly fell. Across the hall, glass cracked inside a viewing wall. The Kharon were already testing the shields. They were going to breach us, someone whispered. Nobody corrected him. I looked toward the exits, expecting to see military officers taking command. Instead, I noticed someone sitting alone at a table, a human. He was wearing a gray maintenance uniform and repairing an old communications device. The station was preparing for war. He was tightening a screw. I watched the human for several seconds before curiosity overcame fear. He looked completely ordinary. Dark hair, tired eyes, gray maintenance uniform, worn boots. Nothing about him suggested a soldier. Nothing suggested that he belonged anywhere near a battlefield. He was simply repairing an old communications device. Another impact shook Nova Ark. The human barely reacted. I walked toward him. Tessa followed, whispering, "Lena, what are you doing? I want to know what he is doing." "You were going to ask a technician that while we were being attacked?" "Yes." The human heard us approaching but didn't look up. I stopped beside his table. "Excuse me." "Yeah?" His voice was calm. "You know the station is under attack?" "Yes." I glanced at Tessa. She covered her mouth, already trying not to laugh. "And you repairing a radio?" "Communications relay." I frowned. "That thing is ancient. Still works." Another explosion rolled through the station. Several people screamed. Emergency shutters began closing over the windows. The human continued adjusting the device. "You aren't worried?" I asked. He finally looked at me. His expression was difficult to read. There was no fear in it, no excitement either. He simply looked tired, as if the attack had interrupted his work rather than threatened his life. "I've dealt with worse." Tessa laughed. I smiled. "Of course you have." He ignored the sarcasm. Instead, he looked toward the tactical display showing the approaching Kharon fleet. For the first time, his expression changed. Not fear, concern. "The Kharon Aaron. The biggest problem," he said. I folded my arms. "Then what is?" He pointed at the station, this defensive network. That, I stared at him. You think our defenses are the problem? I know they are. That answer irritated me. Nova Ark had some of the most advanced defensive technology in the region. Several ancient civilizations had contributed to its design. You, a maintenance technician, I said. The station has military engineers. He returned to his device. Then they should probably stop trusting the computers. I laughed again. I didn't know then that Ethan Cole had just identified the weakness that would nearly destroy Nova Ark. I only knew that I had decided the human was strange. I also knew I wanted to hear what he said next. I thought Ethan was joking. The station was shaking around us. Alarms were screaming, and hundreds of people were trying to reach shelters. Yet this human technician calmly told me that our own defense system was more dangerous than the Kharon fleet. I sat opposite him. Explain. He placed the communications device on the table and folded his hands. The shields are automated. Yes, they redesigned to react to threats without waiting for an operator. That is the point. No, Ethan said. That is the weakness. Tessa laughed behind me. Ethan ignored her. He pointed toward the tactical display. The shield network appeared as a glowing blue web surrounding Nova Ark. The system is distributing power according to predicted attack patterns. The Kharon know that. How? They've fought stations like this before. I frowned. So they'll attack the shields first. They'll make the system reinforce the wrong sections until the power grid becomes unstable. I stared at the display. That sounds impossible. I said. He reached across the table and tapped several locations. Shut these shield nodes down. I almost laughed. You want us to disable our defenses while we're being attacked? Some of them. And why would we do that? Because the station is trying to defend every section equally. He looked at me. You can, to defend everything. Another explosion shook the hall. Ethan continued. You have to decide what we're willing to lose. That sentence silenced me. He picked up his device again. I can reroute the energy manually. Give me access to the maintenance network. Tessa finally laughed openly. You, serious? Yes, just a technician. Ethan glanced at her. That is my job title. Then he returned to his work. I should have walked away. Instead, I stayed. Partly because I wanted to prove he was wrong. And partly because, for the first time since the attack began, someone on Nova Ark sounded completely certain that we were going to survive. I decided to stay beside Ethan. At first, I told myself it was because I wanted to understand his ridiculous plan. That was only partly true. The other reason was that everyone else was afraid of him. Not afraid in the usual sense. They were laughing. Several students nearby had noticed us and were watching with obvious amusement. To them, the situation was simple. Lena Voss, daughter of Admiral Voss, sitting beside a human maintenance worker during a Kharon attack. It was funny, so I decided to make it funnier. I said, for someone who claims to understand the station, its defenses, you look very impressive. Ethan kept working. I've never been accused of that before. Were you expecting to be? No, I smiled. You were not even wearing armor. I didn't need armor for this. That answer made me laugh. Tessa sat beside me. Maybe he's secretly a military genius, she whispered loudly. Ethan glanced at her. No. Secretly an admiral? No. A legendary human warrior? No. I leaned closer. Then what are you? He considered the question for a moment. A technician. I laughed again. He didn't. That was beginning to bother me. Another violent impact struck Nova Ark. The table shook beneath my hands. Somewhere nearby, emergency shutters slammed closed. The laughter around us disappeared. The tactical display changed. Several shield sectors had turned red. Outer ring compromised, the station announced. A second voice followed. Automated defense response active. Ethan looked up immediately. That's wrong. I frowned. What? The response is too fast. How can a defense system react too fast? Because someone is telling it where to look. He stood. For the first time, I noticed something strange. He wasn't too nervous. He wasn't too rushing. He simply put the communications device into his jacket and looked toward the engineering sector. I need access to the old security network. I stood too. Why? Because whoever designed this station expected someone to eventually attack it. And Ethan looked at me. So they left a way to take control back. He started walking. I followed. I still thought he was only a technician. But I no longer thought he was harmless. Not entirely. I followed Ethan into the engineering sector. The corridors were almost empty now. Most civilians had reached the shelters, while security teams moved in the opposite direction, toward the damaged outer rings. Ethan walked quickly, but never hurried. That difference stayed with me. He wasn't running from danger. He was moving toward a problem. We reached a sealed maintenance door. Ethan placed his hand against the panel. Access denied, the system announced. He sighed, still using biometric authorization. They've been here before? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he removed a small tool from his jacket and opened the panel beneath the terminal. Inside was a mess of old wiring. You were going to bypass it? No. He disconnected 3 cables. The door opened. I stared at him. That wasn't to bypass. It was. No. You disconnected the authorization system. Exactly. He stepped inside. I followed. The room beyond was nothing like the modern engineering decks. Dust-covered old consoles. Ancient control units lined the walls. Several displays were dark, their surfaces scratched by decades of use. Ethan stopped before the largest terminal. He entered a sequence manually. The screen came alive. A security emblem appeared. Then another. Then a designation I didn't recognize. Human emergency access. I looked at Ethan. You have authorization? Yes. From where? He hesitated. Old service. That ISN. An answer. No. The terminal displayed a second message. Military identification required. Ethan entered another code. The screen changed. Access granted. I stared at him. You were military. He remained silent. Ethan. Yes. The answer was so calm that it frightened me more than a confession would have. What were you? He looked at the station. His failing defenses. Fleet. Officer. No. Engineer. No. I waited. Finally, he said. Combat systems. The station shook again. Ethan studied the tactical display. The Kharon are using a standard breach algorithm. You recognize it? I designed part of the countermeasure. I stopped breathing for a moment. The human technician opened another screen. His military record appeared. Most of it was classified. Only one line was visible. Status. Retired. Ethan closed the file. We have about 40 minutes, he said. Until what? Until they get inside. Then he began preparing the station for a trap. Ethan worked without speaking. I watched him move between the old consoles, entering commands faster than I could follow. He wasn't guessing. Every movement seemed planned. What are you doing? I asked, giving them away inside. I stared at him. You said they were going to breach us. They are. And you helping them? Not exactly. He brought up a schematic of Nova Ark. The station appeared as a complex web of energy channels, shield nodes, docking rings, and defensive corridors. Ethan highlighted several sections. They use the same attack algorithm every time. How do you know? I've seen it. He marked 3 shield nodes. If we leave these active, they'll reinforce them first. And if we shut them down, they'll think the shields are failing. I understood. You want them to attack a specific section. Yes. Ethan connected the old security network to the station, his primary grid. Their ships will enter the defensive network through these channels. Once they recommitted, we close the exits. What happens then? He looked at me. They'll be inside an energy containment field. I stared at the schematic. An enormous field appeared around the selected sector. They'll be trapped. Yes. And then, Ethan returned to the controls. Then we decide what to do with them. His tone made the sentence sound like a maintenance procedure. The station shook again. A warning appeared, outer defense line collapsing. Ethan didn't react. Instead, he entered another command. Several shield nodes shut down. Across the tactical display, a gap appeared. The Kharon fleet immediately changed formation. I watched the red markers move toward it. They took the bait. I whispered. Ethan nodded. Good. I looked at him. You planned this before they arrived? No. Then how are you so calm? He paused. Because panic doesn't, to improve the situation. Another impact struck. The lights flickered. The Kharon were entering the station's defensive network. Ethan placed both hands on the console. Now we wait. For what? For them to come far enough inside. The tactical display showed dozens of hostile ships crossing the boundary. Then hundreds. Ethan watched silently. Finally, he said, there. His finger moved toward the activation control. The trap was ready. The first Kharon ships crossed the outer defense line at 1443. I watched them appear on the tactical display as red symbols moving through the artificial gap Ethan had created. There were 20 at first, then 50, then more. The Kharon had taken the bait exactly as he predicted. They be inside, I said. I know. Ethan, his hands remained on the console. Outside, the station shook violently. The Kharon had begun their assault. Defense turrets opened fire along the outer ring. Blue-white energy crossed the darkness beyond the station, striking enemy hulls. Several Kharon vessels vanished in explosions. Then the station announced, security sectors 12 through 16 compromised. Ethan looked at the display. They moving toward engineering. My stomach tightened. Can they reach us? Yes. He sounded almost indifferent. Then did we leave? No. Why? Because I need to be here when they enter. I stared at him. You were planning to fight them? If necessary. Another impact threw me against the wall. The lights went out. For several seconds, there was only darkness and the sound of emergency systems restarting. When the lights returned, Ethan was already moving. He pulled a compact weapon from beneath the console. I had never seen one like it. You said you were a technician. I am. That ISN to technician, this weapon. No. He checked the magazine, then looked at me. Stay behind me. That was the first order Ethan ever gave me. I obeyed. We left the control room as alarms echoed through the corridor. Somewhere ahead, something metallic screamed against a sealed door. The Kharon had reached our section. Ethan walked toward the sound. I followed because I was too frightened to remain alone. The door exploded inward. 3 Kharon soldiers entered. They were enormous, armored creatures carrying weapons larger than my arms. Ethan raised his weapon. He fired once. The first Kharon fell. He fired again. The second collapsed. The third charged. Ethan stepped aside, struck its weapon away, and drove his elbow beneath its armored jaw. It hit the floor. Silence returned. Ethan looked at me. Are you hurt? I shook my head. No. Good. He turned toward the control room. We were almost ready. Behind us, more Kharon were coming. This time, I understood. Ethan had never been waiting for the attack to end. He had been waiting for them to come close enough to trap. I had seen Kharon soldiers before, but never this close. They were larger than I had imagined. Their armor was dark and layered, built over bodies that looked less like soldiers and more like living weapons. The 3 Ethan had just defeated had barely slowed him down. I stared at him. Who are you? He didn't answer. More footsteps sounded beyond the corridor. Ethan checked the weapon in his hand. They were coming. How many? Enough. That ISN. Too helpful. It wasn't meant to be. The next door opened. 2 Kharon entered. Ethan fired twice. The first fell immediately. The second raised its weapon. I saw the muzzle flash. Ethan pushed me down. The shot passed above us and struck the wall. Before the Kharon could fire again, Ethan was already moving. He crossed the distance between them, seized the weapon, and drove the creature backward into the bulkhead. The impact shook the corridor. Ethan took the weapon and discarded it. Then he looked at me. Stay down. I did. For the first time, I understood that his calmness was not confidence. It was training. He wasn't thinking about whether he could survive. He was thinking about what needed to happen next. A warning appeared on the wall display. Containment field. 82% charged. Ethan looked at it. Almost. I stared at the number. What happens at 100? They won. To be able to leave. And the ships? Same thing. How? He glanced at me. Energy has to go somewhere. I didn't like the sound of that. Neither did the station. The walls trembled as another Kharon weapon struck the outer structure. Then the emergency system announced. Hostile forces entering designated containment sector. Ethan smiled faintly. It was the first time I had seen him smile. He reached toward the control panel. That's enough. His hand pressed the activation switch. Across Nova Ark, the defensive network changed. The artificial gap disappeared. The shields closed. And every Kharon ship that had entered the station's network suddenly found itself surrounded by an enormous sphere of blue energy. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the trapped fleet began firing. Ethan watched the display. Now they know they retrapped. I looked at him. What do we do? He picked up his weapon. We finish it. The containment field held. For several seconds, the tactical display showed nothing but thousands of blue lines surrounding the trapped Kharon ships. Then their commander found us. A new symbol appeared on the screen. Kharon command vessel. Target lock. Ethan studied it. They identified the control point. What does that mean? They will come for me. I stared at him. How do you know? Because the one controlling the trap. The doors behind us began to shake. Kharon soldiers were approaching. Ethan checked the ammunition in his weapon. You should stay here. No. He looked at me. Lena. I've already seen too much to pretend I can simply wait. He considered that. Then he nodded once. The door exploded. Kharon soldiers poured into the corridor. This time there were more than I could count. Ethan moved. He did not charge. He waited. The first Kharon entered the narrow passage, and Ethan fired. Another followed, and he moved behind the corner. Their weapons struck the walls, but he never remained where they expected him to be. He used the corridor. The walls, the doors, everything. One Kharon reached us. Ethan caught its arm, twisted, and drove it into the floor. Another fired. Ethan pulled me behind a support column. Stay there. He stepped back into the corridor. The fighting lasted less than a minute. When it ended, the floor was covered with weapons and fallen armor. Ethan stood among them, breathing steadily. Then a much larger Kharon entered. Its armor was different. It carried no rifle. It simply looked at Ethan. Our commander wishes to speak with you, the creature said through the translator. Ethan raised his weapon. I don't. The Kharon charged. Ethan waited until the last second. Then he moved. The creature struck empty air. Ethan stepped behind it and drove a blade into the gap beneath its armor. The Kharon collapsed. I stared at him. You've done this before. Ethan looked toward the containment controls. Yes. How many times? He didn't answer. The station began to tremble. The trap was reaching its final stage. And I finally understood that Ethan Cole had not survived a military career by being fearless. He had survived because he knew exactly when to act. The containment field reached 100%. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every Kharon ship inside the network stopped. Their weapons went silent. Their engines failed. Across the tactical display, hundreds of red symbols turned white. Ethan watched the screen without expression. It worked, I whispered. Yes, that's all. He looked at me. What did you expect? I didn't. Perhaps celebration, perhaps relief. Instead, Ethan simply began shutting down systems one by one. Outside, the trapped Kharon fleet was helpless. Their ships had entered the defensive network expecting to break through Nova Ark's shields. They had not understood that Ethan had allowed them inside deliberately. Now the same energy they had tried to exploit surrounded them. The station, its weapons activated. One after another, controlled bursts struck the disabled vessels. Not wildfire, not revenge, precise shots, engines, weapons, communications, navigation. Ethan was dismantling the fleet rather than destroying it. You were not killing them, I said. Not yet. Why? Because they retrapped. He looked at the tactical display. There was no reason to waste ammunition. That answer unsettled me more than violence would have. Then the station-wide communication system activated. A voice filled every corridor. Attention. All hostile vessels have been contained. Civilian evacuation procedures remain active. The voice repeated the message in several languages. Across Nova Ark, people began emerging from shelters. Security teams stopped retreating. The station defenses stabilized. And slowly, everyone realized what had happened. The Kharon fleet had failed. Not because the ancient military powers had defeated them. Not because some legendary admiral had arrived. A human technician had taken control of the station's oldest defense system and trapped an entire assault fleet inside it. I looked at Ethan. Who taught you all this? He was silent for several seconds. Then he answered. People who didn't have the luxury of losing. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. The tactical display suddenly changed. A new transmission appeared. The Kharon commander was requesting negotiations. Ethan read the message. Then he turned to me. Tell them the fighting is over. I blinked. Me? You? Read the diplomat. I almost laughed. I'm a student. Today, that is close enough. I stared at him. For the first time since the attack began, I realized that Ethan trusted me. I walked toward the communications console. Behind me, Ethan remained beside the controls, calm as ever. The galaxy was about to learn his name, and I was beginning to suspect that name had been forgotten for a reason. The Kharon surrendered 20 minutes later. Their commander requested a direct conversation with the human responsible for the defense. Ethan refused. Instead, he transferred the call to me. I stood before the communication screen, suddenly aware that millions of beings might be watching. The Kharon commander appeared. He was enormous, armored from head to toe, with one eye covered by a metal plate. Behind him, his bridge was dark and damaged. You are the human representative? He asked. No, I am Lena Voss. Then where is the human warrior? I glanced toward Ethan. He was sitting at the engineering console, replacing a damaged circuit. He was busy. The Kharon commander stared at me. He defeated my security force. Yes. He trapped my fleet. Yes. He refused to speak with me. Yes. The commander was silent. Then he asked, why? I looked at Ethan again. He seemed completely uninterested in the conversation. Because the fighting is finished, I said. The Kharon commander lowered his head slightly. You humans are strange. I almost smiled. You were not the first to say that. The transmission ended. When I turned around, Ethan was still repairing the console. I walked toward him. Why do humans hide? He didn't. To look up. Hide what? Your military abilities. He tightened a connection. We don't. To hide them. Ethan. He finally looked at me. You were a soldier. Yes. You knew exactly how to defeat the Kharon. Yes. You recognized their attack algorithm. Yes. You knew how to control a military defense network. Yes. And you were working here as a technician. He nodded. That sounds like hiding. He considered my words. Then he placed the tool down. Humanity doesn't need everyone to know what we can do. Why not? Because most of the time, it doesn't matter. He looked through the observation window at the disabled Kharon fleet. We don't want wars. I waited. But if someone brings a war to us, he continued, we don't stop protecting people because we're afraid of what happens next. His voice remained quiet. We prepare. That's it. That's enough. I remembered how I had laughed at him in the common hall. How harmless I had thought he was. Now I understood. His calmness had never meant he was weak. It meant he had already decided what he would do if the moment came. And the moment had come. The story spread through Nova Ark before the Kharon had even left the system. Every station channel carried the same recordings: the collapsing shield network, the trapped fleet, and the human technician standing alone in the engineering sector while trained Kharon soldiers fell around him. At first, nobody believed it. Then the military archives were opened. Ancient governments began searching their oldest records for references to humanity. I watched the results appear across the diplomatic network. One civilization found a report from 2 centuries earlier. Another discovered a sealed military file. Then an ancient empire released a document that had been classified for nearly 600 years. It contained a single reference to human forces. Designation: human peacekeepers. The accompanying description was short. Humans were not considered the strongest species. They were not the fastest. They did not possess superior technology. Their danger came from something else. They prepared for conflicts that other civilizations considered impossible. They endured conditions that most species considered unacceptable. And once committed to protecting someone, they were exceptionally difficult to stop. I read the report twice. Then I looked at Ethan. He was repairing another damaged communications relay. Of course he was. You knew about these records, I said. No, you never wondered why your species had such a reputation? Humans don't spend much time worrying about reputation. I looked through the window. The Kharon fleet was leaving under escort. They had lost ships. They had lost soldiers. But most importantly, they had lost certainty. They had arrived believing Nova Ark was prey. They were leaving knowing that a human technician had dismantled their entire assault without once losing control. News of the battle reached the Galactic Council within hours. Delegates who had once described humanity as harmless suddenly requested military briefings. Some wanted treaties. Others wanted access to human technology. A few demanded explanations. Humanity provided almost none. A short statement was released from Earth's diplomatic office. It contained 3 sentences. Nova Ark was attacked. Human personnel assisted in its defense. Humanity remains committed to peaceful relations. That was all. I found that more unsettling than any threat could have been. The galaxy had spent centuries measuring strength by fleets, weapons, territory, and ancient bloodlines. Humans seemed to measure it differently. They simply prepared and waited. After the Kharon left, Nova Ark returned to normal. Almost. I found Ethan in the same common hall where I had first seen him, sitting at the same table with another broken communications device in front of him. I sat beside him. This time, I wasn't laughing. Ethan, I said, why did you stay? He looked at the device. Someone had to fix it. I smiled. I finally understood. Humans had never needed to prove they were dangerous. They simply prepared, waited, and acted when necessary. I looked through the window at the stars. The galaxy would remember the battle. It would remember the trapped Kharon fleet, the human technician, and the impossible calm with which he had defended us. But I would remember something simpler. I had once sat beside Ethan Cole as a joke because I believed humans were weak. I had been wrong. The most frightening thing about humanity was never how hard humans could fight. It was how long they could remain calm before deciding it was time to act.